All right, everyone, welcome back from lunch. Thank you for being on time. We'll try to keep things moving. I'm now going to introduce my colleague Beth Parker, who is a co-collaborator and conspirator with me on Great Salt Lake Project. Beth is also an adjunct professor of law here at the University of Utah. Beth, take it away.
All right, thanks, Brig, and welcome back from lunch, everybody. I feel like people are always a little peppier right after lunch, so this is an exciting time to do this panel. We have an amazing panel here today. So this panel is entitled "A Breath of Fresh Air: Local Initiatives for Improving Air Quality." So despite significant progress over the past 2 years, including an overall improvement of air quality along Utah's Wasatch Front and Cache Valley, Utah does continue to face distinct air pollution challenges. This includes our unhealthy wintertime inversions that trap PM2 along the Wasatch Front and up in the Cache Valley as well, summer ozone pollution, intermittent wildfire smoke, and increasing shoulder season dust from the exposed bed of Great Salt Lake. So this panel is here today to talk about local solutions currently underway to address these air pollution challenges. And as Professor Rebecca Bratsby noted in an earlier panel today, when asked about potential solutions to air pollution problems, she said the place where we'll see the most progress with air pollution could be local governments and local solutions. So we are very lucky to have with us today some of Utah's key leaders across different sectors who are actively working on innovative solutions to Utah's air pollution challenges. Because of time, I'm not going to read the elongated biographies, but they are online if you'd like to take a look. But I am going to introduce our panelists, and we're so excited to have you all here today. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedules. First, we have Bryce Bird. Director Bird is the director of the Division of Air Quality within the Utah Department of Environmental Quality. We have Professor Dr. Kerry Kelly. She's an associate professor in chemical engineering here at the University of Utah. We have Mayor Erin Mendenhall, who is, I think, the 36th mayor of Salt Lake City. And Dr. Brian Moench, he's president and co-founder of Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment and medical doctor as well. So we are really excited. We are going to have each presenter is going to give us a little overview of some local solutions they're working on. But before we do that, we've done this with other panels today, and I've loved this question. Could each of you please talk about how you became interested in air pollution and air quality work? Because I think just like a picture can paint 1,000 words, stories and backgrounds can really set the stage for a fruitful and memorable discussion.
Sure. Thank you very much. My story is actually one maybe typical to every kid growing up in the Salt Lake Valley, or maybe atypical. I ended up moving into a neighborhood where the person that lived 2 houses away from me was a former director of the Division of Air Quality. And so I was aware of air quality issues from the time I was a little kid. We'd go hunting and fishing together, and he'd talk about the things he was interested in, the things he was working on. As I graduated with a biology degree here from the University of Utah, I had thought wildlife was where I would end up, but he actually introduced me to some folks down there in the department, and it's been a 33-year journey since then. So that was my introduction. It's been a great space to work in, and of course using I always say that biology is the best degree for air quality because it helps you understand the health impacts and understand those other components of that. But with the biology degree from the University of Utah, you also get the physics and the engineering, or the physics, the math, the science that gives you a good foundation to understand this issue here in Utah.
Okay.
Thanks. I moved to Utah in 2000 and I started to notice we had a problem. So I was interested and I was working at the University of Utah. And oddly, there was no funding to study air quality in Utah, but there was funding to study air quality on the US-Mexico border. So that's where I started. And then in about 2008, there was an opening on the air quality board, and you needed somebody with a professional engineer's license who wasn't affiliated with industry. And I think it was a very, very, very small pool. So they picked me. And I learned so much. It was a great opportunity. It really inspired my research. And I've been working on air quality in Utah since about 2008.
Good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here with these folks. Bryce, Kerry, and Dr. Moench all helped to shape my work as an early air quality activist in the Salt Lake Valley. And I started caring about air quality because my oldest son was born in February during an inversion, during a legislative session. And I remember listening to NPR at home with this newborn baby and hearing about a study that Dr. Moench probably had something to do with, that had been presented to our legislature, that summarized that living a lifetime in our valley could take 2 years off of a person's life from the cumulative impact of air pollution. And I couldn't imagine accepting that for this beautiful 9-pound, 1-ounce chubby baby that I was in love with. And so I thought, I have to leave. But honestly, before the radio program was finished, I decided I wasn't going to leave. I love Salt Lake City and I was going to try to do something. And I entered with really no knowledge except the piss and vinegar of my own frustration with the system. And I was educated by folks like Dr. Courtney and Michelle Hoffman and Cameron Kova and Debbie Sigmund, and turned from protest after several years to Breathe Utah, co-founded Breathe Utah, joined the Air Quality Board in 2014 with Kerry and Bryce as the director, and I'm privileged now to be working in a different way on it.
Oh, I need to turn on the button, right? Okay. This is still a little hard for me to talk about almost 25 years later, but my life turned upside down when I got a call in the operating room from my wife telling me that our 27-year-old daughter in the prime of life had breast cancer. And over the next month or so, I committed to my daughter to finding out everything I could about possible causes. And it was then that I learned, because I never learned this in medical school, that 80 to 90% of cancer is environmentally caused. And I remained determined to try and find out how these sorts of things happen to other people. So I held my daughter's hand on her 27th birthday as she was wheeled into surgery for a double mastectomy. Ever since then, I've been determined to try and prevent these sorts of outcomes to other people. Knowing that air pollution has a role in this has been the reason why I've been an air pollution fanatic ever since.
Thank you all. Those were really meaningful backgrounds, and we really, truly appreciate you all being here and sharing some of the formative experiences that have helped you help all of us get better air here in Utah. We are going to start with some individual presentations, and we'll start with Director Bird. Thanks, Bryce.
Thank you very much. Is this okay on the microphone? Kind of lean forward here. I just wanted to give a quick background of kind of where we've been so far here in the state of Utah, and maybe help relieve some of the concerns about maybe the next 4 years. Actually was at a previous presentation, and somebody actually made the statement to us, I guess your staff doesn't have anything to do for the next 4 years, and I want to guarantee you that we still have plenty to do. And even the context of some of the reconsiderations that were announced by EPA, I want to let you know that the majority of those never were in effect. So they haven't been in effect yet. They were either challenged or proposed late in the last administration. And so a lot of the benefits of the Clean Air Act that we heard about in previous presentations are still in full force and still moving forward. And so a lot of the things that I'll talk about today, I just want to let you know and encourage you that a lot of the progress we've made so far, a lot of the focus of our actions from my staff are still working every day to make and improve air quality here in Utah. And we still have the tools necessary to do that. So that's kind of my, so let's get this on the right context. We're still moving forward. So at the Division of Air Quality, maybe different than some of the other speakers here, we are I represent my staff that are actually implementing the Clean Air Act here in Utah. And so we do that through a number of different programs, both identifying sources of air pollution, identifying what we can do to make it better, collecting emissions inventories so we know where the air pollution is coming from, doing air quality science, conducting monitoring throughout the state, air quality modeling to understand the impacts of air pollution and be able to test the ability of new controls to improve air quality. And of course, putting that through a regulatory process through the Air Quality Board to put those rules into effect. And then on the back end of that, my staff is responsible, of course, for enforcing those rules, implementing them here in the state. And so whenever a new rule is established, we have to identify the benefits of that rule. It has to be permanent, quantifiable, and enforceable in order to establish it as a policy that moves forward and moves air quality protection forward in the state under the Clean Air Act. And again, that is all still in effect here in the state of Utah. And then on the permitting side, of course, we still have engineers on staff that are evaluating every new source of pollution. It is still a state law that the best available control technology is evaluated and required for any new source of air pollution that comes into the state. And of course, our compliance staff is out there every day verifying compliance with all those requirements. So I guess we could have a lot to be worried about, but that core foundation is still there and still working here in Utah. And of course, that is our mission. This is really tied to our statutory authority. It was already established by the legislature that we would have good air quality in the state, and it established the Division of Air Quality as the state entity that would be responsible for ensuring that air quality in the state of Utah was protective of public health, that it allowed for the enjoyment of the natural resources and the natural wonders of the state, and that it does foster and encourage economic development in the state, and that is still our mission. I won't be able to cover everything that we do, but I would encourage you, if you've got a phone or if you have a chance to look at this presentation later, or if you just go to our website at airquality.utah.gov, we have an annual report. So each year we highlight those activities that we've taken to both implement the programs here in Utah, the successes and the outcomes from each one of those activities, and a really good context about where we stand with each of the programs under the Clean Air Act that we implement here in the state, and the progress that we've made at achieving and attaining the standards as we've moved over time. I like to start with, of course, we do have variable meteorology from year to year. Our emissions, which I'll talk about in a future slide, are relatively constant, but we are at the mercy of some of the local climate and topography that determines actually how we are compared to the federal health standards. And so each year, this graphic resets. And each day that we exceed any standard amongst the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, you move a stair step up there on the orange line. The gray line represents the recent 5-year average. The broader bar there represents the long-term average. And so last year, we had a very good winter, and that is that despite the fact that we still have the valley here and we have inversions, we actually did not exceed the ambient air quality standards at any time last January, February, March during the inversion season here along the Wasatch Front. We had a wind day, was the first time we exceeded the standard, was a windblown dust day. And so that was the first one there, but where you really see it stepping up during midsummer, these are the ozone and fire days during the summer. So urban ozone is our biggest air quality concern. That's the standard that we are currently not not meeting the ambient air quality standards, and we're currently in the process of developing state plans to address that. And again, wildfires impacted or is included there as well. And then you come all the way to December. And if you remember, we did have an inversion in December, and we had a few days that exceeded the standard in December. But as we moved into January during the legislative session, again, we have not exceeded yet this year any ambient air quality standards. The story of the Clean Air Act is a good one, and it is here in Utah as well. I just chose the last 25 years or so in this graphic, but if we extended it further back, we'd see all the way back from the 1970s when the Clean Air Act went into effect, or in the late 60s when the Utah Air Conservation Act was put into effect. The fact that we're growing, the economy's growing, population's growing, but air emissions are going down, and they've continued to do that through this entire period. Except for that one little bump there, but it is getting tougher now as we're getting through the controls that were very effective in the past, very cost effective in the past. As we look at new strategies, of course, they become more impactful to everybody, and those costs continue to go up. So it does take additional effort to maintain the progress we've made so far. We track air pollution emissions throughout the state. I mentioned that inventory group that looks at mobile sources of emissions, small industry. Of course, the oil fields are represented there in the eastern part of the state. You can see the traffic corridors represented throughout the state, and then the dots are the point sources or the industrial sources of air pollution throughout the state. And again, there's some links there if you want to zoom in at this map. Of course, if you look at the Wasatch Front, I think the biggest takeaway here is it's all of us. When we look at these distributed sources of air pollution, it is really associated with population. It's the goods and services that we consume each day. It's the roadways that we travel on, and then the industries that help and support the economy of the state of Utah. And so as we look at addressing air pollution, we're continuing to focus on identifying what can be done in each one of those category areas. Again, the story for fine particulate pollution, this is the PM 2.5 that we see during our winter inversion periods, is another great story. So in the late 90s, we developed a plan for PM 10 at that time, and then in early 2000, the new standards for PM 2.5 came out. We have actually created 2 rounds of state planning for PM 2.5. Ending in 2017, and then since that time, you can see that progress has shown that we're able to attain that standard. And so all monitors currently throughout the state are currently meeting the PM 2.5 standard at the current level it's set by EPA. The story for ozone is a tougher story, and that is that we did see progress in the past, but despite the fact that we are growing very quickly, we're not getting worse. I guess that is a good part of it, but you can see that progress really leveled out. And during the same time frame, that last 10 or 15 years, we've actually seen a reduction in local emissions by up to 35% of ozone precursors. But because the climate is warmer, we have more days that we can form ozone in our valleys. The contribution of western wildfires that adds precursors into our area, and then the increased contribution of international emissions as well has kind of decoupled the reductions in local emissions with the actual monitored ozone values throughout the state, and especially here along the Wasatch Front. So we currently have non-attainment areas. This is part of that federal Clean Air Act program. If we are not meeting a standard, the area is designated as non-attainment, and then we're put on time clocks for taking action to develop plans to bring the area back into attainment. If we miss a deadline that was established in the Clean Air Act, we're bumped up to the next classification, which brings in more mandatory requirements, more planning requirements, and then we keep moving forward on this pattern or process of improving air quality. Again, PM 2.5 currently meeting all the standards. For ozone, both in the Northern Wasatch Front and in the Uinta Basin, we are currently exceeding that federal standard. The Northern Wasatch Front was just redesignated from moderate to serious. That classification that again tells us what level of controls, what level of costs we look at, and requires again a development of a new state plan to address that. For the Uinta Basin, that area was just reclassified from marginal to moderate, which again starts that planning process for new state plans to address that. Just a quick timeline here. Just the focus here, of course, is this standard is in place now. It does obligate the Division of Air Quality to create a new plan through the Air Quality Board by January of 2026. And so that activity and effort is still moving full force today. Still identifying strategies, improving inventories, identifying major source controls, and other options that we have to improve air quality. And so we're still moving forward on that as well. When it comes to identifying the sources of air pollution or the actual cause of what we're experiencing in the valley, these computer models that we've talked about actually through the last several days lead us to understand where the air pollution is coming from. And very different than what we experienced during the winter inversion periods, when a lid is on the valley, all the emissions that we generate are what is responsible for the concentrations that we experience. During the summertime, that's not the case. And in fact, I hate to describe colors here. I guess purple, I'll call it purple. Bar there represents the emissions that originate within the state that are controlled under federal and state air quality programs. The largest component, that the bottom bar there is the natural and transported sources from other states. So natural emissions and then emissions transported from other states as well is the largest component of what actually provides the precursors that then can be acted upon by the environment and converted to ozone during our summertime. And then international emissions, the top bar there is also a major component. About 10% of the ozone that develops here in the valley can be traced back to that contribution of the global circulation of air pollutants, those international emissions. So this is one of the challenges that we have is identifying enough controls locally and being able to work through the regulatory process to account for those contributions from out-of-state emission sources or uncontrollable natural emission sources. So in the state, won't spend too much time on this, but we do have the federal requirements that kind of give some black and white requirements for us. But we do have, as I mentioned, the Utah Air Conservation Act, which also charges us with finding solutions. And so as we move forward looking at real world solutions, sometimes we don't get credit for those under the Clean Air Act, but they're still the right thing to do, and it still improves air quality. And so a lot of things, education, outreach, focused efforts with equipment exchanges, things like that are an important part of our overall strategy, but it's not something that, again, is permanent, quantifiable, and enforceable that could be counted as a strategy under that Clean Air Act regime. There is a provision in the Clean Air Act, this contribution of international emissions. So we have done that demonstration and provided that to EPA to give us some relief, at least so we're not chasing a target that we can't attain because it's beyond our control. Probably stop here, then hit my next slides very quickly. So this modeling work has given us a lot of clues about what will improve air quality the best here along the Wasatch Front. So if you let me take just a minute, this isopleth shows that, looks at the primary precursors of ozone formation, being oxides of nitrogen and volatile organic compounds as a whole. And then what level of reduction would result in improved ozone concentrations at a given monitor. And so the quick takeaway from this, the starting point is the small dot there. Hopefully you can see it in the room here. The larger bracket is a 50% reduction from VOCs going from left to right and from oxides of nitrogen going from top to bottom. And in order to achieve the standard, it would take a 50% reduction in both VOCs and oxides of nitrogen from local emissions in order to attain this standard. And so that is a heavy lift. Most of the strategies we have look at 1 or 2% reductions or a few percentage. So a 50% reduction is really what it would take to reduce the levels of emissions locally in order to attain the standard here along the Wasatch Front based on the best understanding that we have right now and the models that we're using. So a heavy lift, and we're again continuing to work on that. New rules are currently under consideration. We go through a process to identify what's possible and move through the Air Quality Board to adopt and move these forward. I mentioned local incentives. I'll just hit this because my staff asked me to. So here next week, we have a one-day window for our lawn and garden equipment exchange this year. So register on one day. You'll be notified if you're eligible. Then about a week later, those appliances can be picked up. So lots of information there, but basically it's focused on two-stroke string trimmers and leaf blowers, and the ability to have up to $200 toward a new one if you turn in an old one. So again, a great example of some of those real world solutions that have been funded by both the legislature and federal grants that we've had. They're able to move the needle on the actual air pollution emissions, but aren't typically credited under a state implementation plan. Other major activities for this year, again, highlighting the fact that we're not doing anything while we're waiting for the federal government to make changes. We do have a number of actions that the Air Quality Board will undertake this year, finalizing the last elements of the PM 2.5 redesignation back to attainment of the standard and a maintenance area designation. An SO2 standard that we're still working to develop a state plan to achieve, and then responding to some legislation that took place this session. So with that, that's our quick overview of the work that we're doing, kind of the on-the-books, black and white work that the regulatory agency does, and then we'll let the panel discuss more about what we're doing and then have questions at the end. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Bird. That was really great to hear. Really great to hear what DAQ is doing and what you're doing. Thank you so much. All right, we now have Dr. Kelly.
Okay, thanks for letting me come talk to you today. The Stegner always puts on such great events. I'm really delighted. So I'm going to talk about two ways to improve air. One is reducing emissions, and the other is reducing our exposure. So what I'm going to talk about, I think, really complements what Bryce just talked about. So we're working on a study where we have looked at about 20 years of filters collected at Division of Air Quality stations. We look at the filters, we can look at the composition of the material on those filters, and then we use the fact that like particles from a diesel engine look quite different than particles from wood smoke or from the Great Salt Lake. So knowing that, we can do some statistics, and this was pretty hard to do over 20 years because methods change and all kinds of things change, but I had a good team to work on this, and we can see that PM 2.5 concentration has declined dramatically, almost by a factor of 2 over the last 20 years. And we can also see that some of these sources have changed. So for example, if you look at the contributions of sulfate, it's gone way down. If you look at the contributions of fires, so that's wood combustion of any type, that has actually gone up. And I'm going to talk about some of the key drivers of that. So the last panel talked about federal regulations. And there have been a number of them that have helped us get to where we are. And those include increasingly stringent fuel sulfur standards and mobile and point source emission standards. But I also wanted to mention some of our state and local initiatives have been really important for the reduction of sulfate, nitrate, and our vehicle emissions. And altogether, that's been a big contributor to the reduction in the pie. But I also wanted to call out some of the, actually point sources have made some big strides. And that includes Kennecott closing its coal-fired power plant. In 2016, it did that in the winter. And then in 2019, it did a complete closure of that power plant. The Tesoro plant, which is now Marathon, installed a wet gas scrubber that reduces sulfur emissions substantially, did that in 2018. And then the Salt Lake refineries, the governor, advocates, DAQ, they got together and we got the refineries to produce Tier 3 fuel. So Tier 3 fuel benefits VOC, NOx, and sulfur emissions from all of our mobile sources. So that was a big win for our area. The DEQ passed a ultra low NOx water heater bill. Unfortunately, this bill seems to be the target of the legislature every year, but they have been hanging on, and that is a good source of NOx reductions, and I'm hoping we can keep on keeping on with that because, as Bryce had said, you're looking at very small reductions and working really hard to get those, so we need every one of these that we can get. And then Bryce had mentioned a number of rules that are under consideration. There are a number of incentives as well. These include things like the Clean Diesel program, where you're doing things like electrifying truck stops. You are doing catalytic retrofits on trucks. You are replacing old high polluting equipment with lower polluting equipment. Along those lines, we also have vehicle inspection and maintenance programs. So those are all local things that have really helped us get to where we are. I also wanted to mention that the things we're doing are also helping with ozone. So I'm talking about PM 2.5 because we've got a nice story to tell, but these methods are helping ozone as well. I wanted to talk about some of the other changes that are not necessarily decreasing. So with fires or wood combustion, we have seen substantial reductions in wintertime wood combustion. And that is due to a combination of local efforts. So we've got state health departments. We've got DAQ who's more proactively calling no burn days. We have advocacy groups. We have the media outlets are much more proactive about telling people when to burn and when not to burn. And we have seen that on the filters over the last 10 years, that those contributions have declined substantially. However, the story during summer and fall is quite different. As our last panel mentioned, we have increasing emissions from wildfires, and that is evident in the summer, and that's also evident that overall those contributions to our PM 2.5 are going up and up. The contributions of crustal emissions or dust from like the Great Salt Lake playas and even our roads, gravel and paved, are their relative contribution is increasing. And that is because we've got more vehicles on the road, we've got more vehicles traveling. So you're going to get more entrained road dust with that. In addition, we've got increasing intensity and length of droughts. And then we've got the drying of the Great Salt Lake and some of the other regional playas that's leading to increased dust contributions, especially in summer and fall. And then chlorine is a very complex story. We only get filter measurements every third or sixth day, and you need temperatures below about 10 degrees Fahrenheit before you get ammonium chloride formed. So that story is complex, but HBIL 420 will hopefully help give the state some tools to address U.S. magnesium emissions if and when they come online again. Okay, so that was one half of the story. The other half of the story is reducing our exposure. Okay, so I'm going to give just two kind of examples here of how we can think about reducing our exposure. So this map shows the state of Utah. The colors are the number of days that are unhealthy for sensitive groups for either PM 2.5 or PM 10. But you'll notice there's a lot of gray counties. Those gray counties mean there is no air quality regulatory measurement. And if there's no regulatory measurement, there is no air quality forecast. And I should mention this graph is from about a year ago, so it has changed just a little bit over time. So we have a project where we're trying to help people that live in these areas get reliable air quality information, hopefully cost effectively. We also know that Utah's terrain is very complex. So even if you do have one regulatory monitor in a large county where you're living and working and recreating, your air quality might be quite different. So one group of people that really struggles with this problem are people making decisions about youth outdoor athletics. So like athletic trainers, athletic directors, parks and recreation. And you could imagine, even if you live in an area with reliable air quality measurements, you may be traveling to an area with no measurements, and you also need forecasts. So furthermore, the responses to an air quality hazard vary widely district by district. So we have been working to help decision makers. So this graph shows 1 year later, so we're about a year and a half into the project. All of the blue dots show sensors that we have added to counties, and we've added sensors to 7 counties that previously had no reliable measurements. In addition, the state added monitors to 2 counties that previously did not have them. We're also providing automated location-specific, so about 12-kilometer grid resolution, air quality forecasts to 16 counties that lacked them. So that's critical as you're planning day-out activities. And I also wanted to thank Heather Holmes and Derek Malia from the previous panel. They're the people that have been doing those forecasts. And you can go to the website, you can click on your location, you can see your current air quality, and then you can click on another tab. If you allow it to keep your location, it'll show you your forecast for the next 3 days. We are also working with the Utah Board of Education, Athletic Trainers Association, High School Activities Association, PTA, to develop actionable uniform guidelines. So hopefully that's going to give a level playing field to all athletes in the state of Utah. So I'm going to give you an example of how this works from last fall's Yellow Lake fire that took place in the Uinta Basin. So in this map, you'll see sort of the northeast corner of Utah. You'll see a little flame kind of in the middle there. That's the Yellow Lake fire. And then you'll see a bunch of dots. Most of them are green. So those are DAQ sensors, R sensors, and purple air sensors. You have some text in black. Those are the high schools in the vicinity of the fire where we have air quality sensors. And then you can hopefully, let's see if I can get this to work. Maybe, no. Okay, we're trying to get the video to work. There we go. And then click the video. Thank you. Okay, so we saw one red dot. That was Manila High School. That high school is in Daggett County with about 1,000 people. So the Division of Air Quality would be very unlikely to ever put a regulatory monitor in such a slow populated area. But that sensor of ours was the only sensor that provided any reliable air quality information in that airshed. In fact, it was the only source of air quality information in that airshed. And we were delighted to be able to show that. And another example, just 2 days later, if you look at that same fire, the wind has now shifted and we're at Monday, and you can see that the wind is now carrying that smoke from the fire into Duchesne, Park City, and Summit County. So that gives you ideas on how air quality can change pretty quickly and how lower cost sensors can help supplement regulatory measurements to give information that's critical for decision makers. I also wanted to say one other thing about reducing exposure. So we spend about 80% of our time indoors, and my team evaluated indoor air quality at 18 locations on the University of Utah campus, including the law school building. Thank you. And we found a couple interesting things. So we looked at, with 2 years of data, we've looked at how indoor air quality varies during wildfire events, during dust events, and inversions. And generally, our indoor air quality is pretty good, but there is some room for improvement, especially during wildfire events. So if you look at that graph, you'll see a dotted line that shows outdoor air quality. We did exceed the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for a couple hours, but you'll also see the blue humps. You're like, what the heck is that? Well, that's a building with an air side economizers. Air side economizers are great for efficiency. When you've got good temperature and relative humidity, you bring in more outdoor air, super efficient. However, during wildfire smoke events, you need to be careful about that. So we're working with facilities. Facilities has been awesome, but this highlights the need, and ASHRAE recently highlighted the need for all commercial buildings to have a wildfire smoke preparedness plan. And that's what the University of Utah needs. Indoors, it's a lot easier because these portable just air filters, they're pretty efficient. They're $50 to $200. They're a very tractable way to deal with air quality. So just a little tip for all of us. I wanted to acknowledge all the various funders. Thank you. And I wanted to thank all the teams. I showed a bunch of work from a bunch of collaborators and students and staff, and they've all been wonderful, as have the partners. I thank them all. And then I also wanted to say, if you wanted to see the maps with the forecasts and our high school sensors, that's at AQ&U. Salt Lake County Health Department also carries our map and does TELUS, and Salt Lake County and TELUS have the wind vectors if you want to see those, and my email address. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly. And now we'll hear from Mayor Erin Mendenhall.
Thank you, and thanks, Bryce and Kelly, Kerry Kelly. Can I call you Kerry? Thanks, Kerry. It's exciting to see the work that continues and that is on the cutting edge here locally. Salt Lake City, I know that in the last panel it was talked about that maybe it falls to the locals now, where we await federal decisions that may gut the things that we have relied on to achieve the improvements that Bryce talked about over the last 25 years. While we also await those decisions, I'm going to talk to you today about that even smaller piece of the stack that Bryce showed, with about 17% that's in Utah's control of the emissions inventory. This is not part of that. The emissions that Salt Lake City is adjusting by the investments we're making and some of the changes in direct investments in construction that we're making is even outside of that. So we're scratching at some of the unregulated pieces of that inventory stack that have a really big impact on the local air that we breathe, even in your front yard or your backyard. Where did I click this? Okay. And this is a brief summary of some of the initiatives I'm going to talk through with you today, and hopefully in the Q&A part of the panel, if there's other topics, you'll let us know. But we know that we rely on these kind of partnerships and this research that's happening locally to help inform how we can be more powerful at the municipal level in improving the air quality that we breathe. And we also know that we are growing. Our downtown, for example, has doubled its population since I took office as mayor in 2020. Doubled the downtown population, and now over 20,000 people who call downtown home, with about 7,700 more units in the pipeline over the next several years just for the downtown core. So as we're growing, we need to make sure we're doing so in the most sustainable way that we can, especially given our regulatory context in the state of Utah, with a supermajority Republican legislature that happens to be quite pro-development. Makes it different for municipalities to look at what we can control. First, I wanted to tell you about our newer program as of last year, Clean Air SLC, where we distribute equipment and information directly to our residents. It launched 2 new programs last year, and they were both major successes that we're looking to continue with the budget proposal I'll take to the council in the next couple of months. Our e-bike incentive program was the first time Salt Lake City's done that. We awarded more than 330 Salt Lake City residents e-bike vouchers, and more than half of those vouchers went to our low-income residents. We did a prioritized process for those applications, and that's the kind of approach that we think is appropriate and that we'd like to continue. Bryce talked a little bit, big thanks to his staff pushing him on the landscaping equipment exchange, but we partnered with DAQ to figure out how Salt Lake City could start to invest in that type of programming, and we've continued that. We launched both a spring and a fall version, so think snow blowers. There's even electric snow shovels now, and also that lawn care equipment. And it removed over 6,000 pounds of air pollution from our neighborhood air. Using a gas-powered leaf blower for 1 hour is the equivalent of driving a new car 727 miles. So it's a significant impact, and it all hangs around right in your yard and in your neighborhood. So we're going to bring that program back again next month. So if you do apply for Bryce's program and you don't get picked, and you live in Salt Lake City, you should probably apply for our program too. In April, Salt Lakers can apply to receive these vouchers for electric lawnmowers and even more handheld tools like leaf blowers or string trimmers, hedge trimmers, and even chainsaws. The indoor air quality program, and shout out to Dr. Mendoza, who I see in the audience here, who's helped also inform our insights there. We launched that earlier this month. It's designed to support households that are most affected by poor indoor air quality, such as homes with individuals who are more sensitive to air pollution and households that are located near major roadways or polluting industries. So residents can apply to receive a set of 4 high-efficiency HVAC filters and either an air purifier or a single burner induction cooktop. Residents also receive monthly newsletters from us with tips on improving their air quality, and we'll keep updating that with the research that's coming out. In April of last year, so just 11 months ago, we celebrated the opening of the Electron solar plant that secured nearly half of the power from that entire facility for Salt Lake City government municipal power needs. So about 80% of the city's municipal power is now supplied through this Electron solar plant. And we've calculated that the electricity produced by Electron avoided 110,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide from grid-connected power plants across the western U.S. We also estimate that we've reduced 2,500 pounds of criteria pollutants from the Wasatch Front power plants in Salt Lake and Utah counties. And between April and November of 2024, the city saved almost $900,000 on electricity bills enrolling in Electron. We expect those savings to continue over the next several years as we continue to see power costs increase through traditional sources. We also have the Solar for All concept that it's a pilot program. It would support no cost or low cost rooftop solar deployment for residents. And it's a grant that was awarded to our Office of Economic Development. But the grant is in a tentative place right now, like a lot of grants that are out there, and we're waiting for more clarity on that funding before we can proceed. But we're always trying to evaluate ways that we can support expansion of solar installation, large and small, throughout Salt Lake City to bring down utility costs for our residents, increase affordability, and of course, to reduce pollution. We have supported electric vehicle use in Salt Lake City for about a decade, and the city currently owns and operates 26 public level 2 charging stations with 52 ports around Salt Lake City and several dozen in addition that are at the Salt Lake City International Airport. We have in our fleet almost 70 electric vehicles, and we're always looking to grow that number every year to replace our gas vehicles with electric or other clean fuel alternatives. The airport itself has 270 total clean or alternative fuel vehicles in their fleet, and that is a big deal for us. All those little pushers that push the planes around or drag the luggage carts were really dirty polluters in the old airport. And when we opened the new airport, we switched all of those little tugs to alternative or electric vehicles, and it's made a big difference for us. We're also big time invested in public transit. If you didn't know, a dedicated piece of our sales tax goes to invest every single year in public transit. So I'll tell you a little bit about those. The free school passes or UTA passes rather, for students, parents, and teachers is one of the most fun things I've had the privilege of being a part of in the last several years. But this is a partnership with the Salt Lake City School Foundation and UTA, and it puts passes in the hands of every single student, one parent from each student household, and all of the teachers. And they took over 593,000 trips on transit last school year alone. We are building future transit riders. We are reducing air pollution. We're making it more affordable for families to get around this city and live here. There's also the Go Route, which we've done a little press on lately. It's a frequent service network with UTA. We now have 8 high-capacity bus routes in Salt Lake City. That means that they run every 15 minutes or less from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Saturday. That is the kind of bus service that we want to expand across the city, but it's also the kind that means you don't have to look at a schedule. You know, if you show up, the bus is going to show up really soon and you're going to get where you need to be on time. Our ridership data shows that the investments that we make annually are paying off. We invest $6.3 million annually in 4 key routes. These are routes that Salt Lakers ride. Not necessarily that the people commuting in and out of our city ride. So it's Route 1, 2, 9, and 21. And we make those frequent routes with our investments. By 2024, the number grew from 4.6 million trips 2 years earlier to 6.1 million on those routes. So we've added millions of riders with that investment of regularity. Let's talk a little bit about water. Did you know that even though Salt Lake City's population has increased 12% since the year 2000, it's about 20,000 people, we are using 36% less water in Salt Lake City. The way that you grow matters. The regulations that you have in place, whether or not you make your funding available, and the kind of incentives for development absolutely determine the way that your community impacts with the environment. In 2024, through increased proactive maintenance on our public utility lines, that team brought water mainline breaks to their lowest level in 5 years. We have a beautiful future of renewable energy ahead of us because we will achieve 100% renewable electricity for all of Salt Lake City by 2030. This will not be an opt-in program. It will not be a dramatic cost difference either. It must not be, actually, by the legislation that entitled this to this process to happen. Everyone will get to renewable electricity for every outlet. I like to say from 7-Eleven to your house, to the library, to the schools that we're in, every building to renewable. The City Council recently approved updates to our comprehensive sustainability policy that brings us into alignment with our goals. It added Envision and Sites to approved certification pathways for the city. And these two additional systems allow for a more diverse range of city projects to utilize sustainability framework. For example, our Glendale Regional Park, if you didn't know, the city's first new regional park in over 63 years, will be opening its first phase this year. And it's the very first regional park on the west side of Salt Lake City. It's at the old Raging Waters site, and it will be Glendale Regional Park. When it opens, it will be Utah's first sites certified project. The Salt Lake City Department of Public Utilities is building a new water reclamation facility. For anybody who's not a water buffalo in the crowd, that's the poop plant. There's only one of them in this city. Every storm drain, every toilet, every sink and shower faucet runs to this one facility. It's very old. And with the new nutrient requirements from the federal government, we had to build a new facility, and it's been under construction for many years. It has a couple more years in its timeline. It's doing great. And when it opens, it will be the first Envision project that's been registered in the state of Utah. Salt Lake City's City Creek water treatment plant upgrades are underway, and that will also be certified through Envision. Our Department of Airport has 2 new taxiways that are being designed. They will be Envision certified, and phases 1 and 2 of the airport redevelopment program are LEED Gold certified. Finally, Pioneer Park design is underway. We have over $10 million of changes coming to Pioneer Park, and that will implement this recently completed park vision plan. And that project at Pioneer Park will be site certified, and it starts construction this fall. So we're working with all of the tools that we know how to use, but it's conversations with you and research such as we've heard about today and more that is helping our sustainability team run by Debbie and Sophia, who are in the room with us today, to figure out even new and more ways that we can help improve our air quality in Salt Lake City. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mayor Mendenhall. Our kids are friends, so I know this. We're now excited to hear from Dr. Moench.
Good afternoon, and I want to thank our previous speakers. They outlined a lot of good initiatives that are happening here, and I'm going to do pretty much the opposite, as is my role. I'm here on behalf of Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment. We're one of the largest civic organizations of healthcare professionals in the Western United States, and we are dedicated to improving public policy as it relates to the environmental degradation that we all experience and its effect on public health. We believe in medical science, environmental science, and climate science. In other words, we're terrorists. But before I talk about air pollution, I first want to talk a little bit about another kind of pollution that I think is even more existential, if not foundational, to our air pollution problem. And that is thought pollution. A couple of you, or maybe I think several of you, were here on the Capitol Hill a couple of weeks ago at the Stand Up for Science rally. And we had I'm guessing about 800 people there throughout the country. In similar rallies, we probably had tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. Another way to think of thought pollution, and the way I'm using it here, is it's an anti-science delusion. And that leads to an anti-reality hallucination. In that, if we cannot come to an agreement on what are facts and what are science, then we cannot agree on what reality is. And what that does, in my view, is that it promotes a corruption of our values, moral bankruptcy, if you will. Now, Voltaire said this essentially in the same way, but much more poetically, when he said, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." It's a quote you've heard probably many times, but unfortunately, we saw that on full display last week when our new EPA director stood up before the country and said that the EPA now declares the greatest day of deregulation our nation has seen. He essentially turned the mission of the EPA upside down and said it would now be to lower the cost of buying a car, heating a home, and running a business. We are driving a dagger through the heart of climate change religion. This is a combination of anti-science delusion, anti-reality hallucination, and moral bankruptcy. Now, not to be outdone, many of you who have observed over the last several years that a couple of our branches of our state government are eager to get in on that kind of action. This push for a sovereignty of the Utah government, meaning we want to be immune from federal regulations, is essentially an attempt to basically undo environmental protection in the state. I'll just give you one particular example. It's been an effort to undo the Good Neighbor Rule, which prohibits one state from polluting and therefore harming other nearby states. And our legislature has been very much active in the effort to continue to burn our coal-fired power plants in central Utah with all that pollution drifting over to Colorado. And I guess the attitude is, who cares if that kills people in Colorado? That's moral bankruptcy. Now, I'm going to admit here that Republicans don't have a monopoly on anti-science and anti-reality and moral bankruptcy. I'll give you an example. 2 years ago, the Biden administration announced that they were going to tighten the annual PM 2.5 standard. Great. Public health advocates, environmental advocates, we're all happy about that. The fossil fuel industry hated it. But then they said, well, we're not going to tighten the 24-hour PM 2.5 standard. And as most of you know, that's the standard that we violate. That's indicative of the problem that we have here along the Wasatch Front. We violate those 24-hour standards. The EPA said they weren't going to do it. So we launched an effort. It took us a couple months. We produced a 100-page report with about 400 medical references, and we sent it to the EPA, and we said, if you don't tighten the 24-hour standard, Utah will get very little benefit from that tightening of the standard. A year later, they blew us off, and they announced that, no, they're not going to tighten the 24-hour standard. It's all the same medical literature, essentially, that they used as the basis for tightening the annual standard, but they didn't tighten the 24-hour standard. So another example, disappointingly, is I've had a collection of the physicians in my group meet with the chemical division of the EPA. We did this a couple of years ago. We produced a 63-page report on all the health consequences of pesticides, about 380 references. We handed it to them. We said, we want to talk about this. And so they talked about it with us, and they said, now what do you want us to do about it? They were clearly not interested in even discussing it. I was shocked at their indifference to the issue. So my point is, these kinds of problems, this anti-science attitude, this anti-reality hallucination, this moral problem that we have with our governmental policies is not just on one side of the political spectrum. Now, we know that, in fact, if we're going to be true to the science, you've heard from other speakers like Dr. Payne, there's no safe level of air pollution. How do you square that with our federal regulations if there's really, in fact, no safe level? Now we know that there's no safe level of exposure to multiple kinds of environmental contaminants like lead, like mercury, and others. And in fact, I'll give you one more. There's no safe level of country music you can listen to. It all causes brain damage. Now, to those of you who doubt that research, you might take comfort in the fact we've also found there's no safe level of opera that you can listen to. But let's get back to air pollution now. This is a graph very similar to what Dr. Payne showed you yesterday, but it shows something very important. And that is, not only is there no safe level of air pollution, but the relationship or the dose response curve between concentration and health effects is not linear. The concentration of air pollution is on the horizontal axis going in that direction, and the consequences or health outcomes is on the vertical axis going up. And you can see as soon as you get any kind of exposure to air pollution, in this particular study, 3 different types: smoking, secondhand cigarette smoke exposure, and community air pollution. As soon as you get any exposure at all, you have health outcomes, including sudden death. So how do we square that with federal regulations? Well, let's put this in that context. That little green box there corresponds to what we consider green air quality. And then the orange section here corresponds to moderately impaired air quality, and then the red section to more hazardous air quality. Look at that green box. What that is telling us is, and this kind of study has been duplicated now numerous times, most of the damage to your health, the greatest risk for sudden death, occurs in that green box when the air pollution level is lowest. Most deaths are occurring from air pollution in that green box when the air quality is officially labeled green. One study from MIT a couple of years ago estimated that 99% of the air pollution-related deaths in the country occurred in counties that met the air quality standards. So what's the point here? We know we can't live in a situation where there's no air pollution at all, so how do we reconcile this? Well, the point is, it isn't just circumstances like we're seeing here that we should be concerned about. We should be concerned about air pollution when it looks like this. Now, we shouldn't have to obsess about it, but we should have this kind of knowledge of medical science inform our public policy. Now, some of the other presenters have talked about there's not necessarily an equal amount of health hazard to the various types of PM 2.5. Here are 4 different types. Anybody want to raise their hand and say, what are the 2 of these 4 types of air pollution that are most toxic than the others? Wood smoke is one. What's the other? Jet fuel. And for one reason that's common to both, and that is they both have very high concentrations of ultrafines, which is the smallest subset of PM 2.5. Now, that's not the entire story, but that's one of the big reasons why those 2 types are the most toxic. And so if we have public policy that not only reflects the total amount of PM 2.5, but also reflects the differentiation between the toxicity of these types, then we're going to actually protect health better. So the smaller the particle, the more damage it can do, generally speaking. And now we know also that our PM 2.5 monitors are really not very well equipped to study ultrafine concentrations. And in fact, that if we really wanted to know what we're doing to our health, we would not study particle mass captured on filters, but we would have particle counters. The point of it being here that our PM 2.5 monitors do not always tell us how much health hazard there is in the atmosphere. We should be also concerned about these tiny particles that are really only adequately studied and captured by particle counters. And a little bit of an aside, if those of you who are here are motivated to go get an air purifier, make sure you look at the specs of what kind of an air purifier it is. You want an air purifier that will capture particles down to 0.1 microns in size and smaller. Okay, the first solution that I want to talk about is let's not make things worse. But in fact, we're poised to do exactly that. Our physicians group is suing the state of Utah to try and prevent this network of inland ports from happening. And we're doing that for these reasons. It will be the biggest setback in air quality and public health, we think, in the modern history of this state. Most of these 12 sites of project areas are surrounding the Great Salt Lake, including right next to and some of them right on top of Great Salt Lake wetlands. You cannot save the Great Salt Lake by amputating its wetlands. We calculate that about 77,000 acres of our wetlands will either be paved over or significantly impaired. Now, wetlands and lakes are pollution sponges. There are even studies that suggest you can predict the amount of PM 2.5 in a community by knowing the acreage of the wetlands in that community. So losing our wetlands is a huge mistake if we want to preserve air quality. Also, when you warm or disturb wetlands, that releases a battery of greenhouse gases, methane, CO2, and nitrous oxide among them. Plus, a lot of these project areas are promoting the idea that we can bring big water-intensive data centers here. If we consume more water along with what it takes to run a data center and then multiply that by dozens, if not hundreds, that water is going to be stolen from the Great Salt Lake. The Great Salt Lake will shrink. We've all talked about the dust storms that are inevitable from that, but we don't talk as much about the fact that a shrunken lake increases the solar reflectivity of the drying lake bed. That promotes more ozone. It increases the heat island effect, and that further promotes more ozone. The development of the inland ports are expected to cover 47 square miles. Much of that will be asphalt and concrete. Asphalt continues to emit VOCs and secondary organic compounds in perpetuity. In fact, one study found that the largest contributor, or there was a larger contributor to summertime PM 2.5 in Los Angeles from all the asphalt than from all the tailpipes of all their vehicles. We think the inland ports will bring another 500,000 vehicles into our roadways, many of them diesel trucks. And then we're looking at 20 plus years of construction costs, or not only construction costs, but construction activity and all the dust involved. We have heard from the director of the Inland Port Authority that he wants to make Salt Lake City a top gateway for air cargo in the USA, but we won't talk about the pollution involved with that. One study found that all the planes that come in and out of LAX actually are responsible for about half as much pollution as all the tailpipes of their 13 million cars. And it's the worst type. It's highly concentrated in ultrafines, and it creates a plume that goes out as far as 10 miles, a 400% increase in ultrafine particulate matter. And finally, I'm sure I'm running out of time. I want to mention one thing that has a good and bad component to it. Our physicians group looked at the medical literature about 8 years ago, and we saw this growing body of work that showed how toxic air pollution is to the developing brain, to acute and chronic brain function, and its contribution to neurodegenerative diseases, et cetera, et cetera. And we said, boy, why don't we put air purifiers in all the state's school classrooms? So we floated that idea to the legislature, and they, of course, brushed it off. But then the pandemic hit. And through the Inflation Reduction Act, the Biden administration started making available to states a significant sum of money to put air purifiers in classrooms to reduce the transmission of COVID. So, much to their credit, the State Department of Health and Human Services called us up and said, we can't implement this program. Can you do it? And we jumped at the chance. So we hired a small group of people, and over the next 2 years, we were able to place in 75% of the school classrooms in the state, air purifiers in each classroom, and in over 61% of all the daycare centers and pre-care centers. Well, great. That's 30,000 air purifiers. But at the time, we also said, well, they're going to need air filters too. And so we asked them, make sure you order enough air filters for a couple of years. But now we're approaching the point where we're starting to run out of air filters. And we got a very terrifying email last week where one of these school administrators emailed us and said, well, we're out of air filters. We can't afford to replace, we're out of air filters. And we're thinking about maybe just throwing away these air purifiers that you spent $20 million on. So we definitely want to preserve what we've accomplished so far in schools and all these air purifiers that these kids benefit from, and we need $2 million to do it. So those of you who have $2 million in your back pocket, see me in a dark alley afterwards. We do not accept Bitcoin or crypto or NFTs, and we don't accept Tesla stock either. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moench, and thank you to all our panelists. We have a flurry of questions, so we'll try to get to as many as we can. The first question, Bryce, Dr. Bird, Director Bird, you mentioned it's all of us. We're all responsible for trying to do our best. So I'd actually like to ask this question of all of the panelists, but could you tell us what can individuals do to contribute to cleaner air? And conversely, what can individuals do to protect themselves?
I think what I can say that doesn't take away from what the other panelists are going to say. I think I'll probably frame the concept, and that is, population equals poor air quality. We've seen as we try to put more people in the valley, it is projected to overwhelm the things we've made, and that's because everything that we do contributes to the air quality that we experience. And so any solvent that we use, so anything that smells like a chemical solvent, if you use it, if it starts out wet and ends up dry, what happened between those 2 points in time was an air emission of a volatile organic compound. When you look at any combustion source, whether that's driving your car or heating your home or cooking your food, part of that combustion process results in oxides of nitrogen if you're burning that in ambient air, which we all are. And so everything that we do has a component of air pollution that is associated with it. So I think an overall arching message is just that once we become aware that there are things that we can do, and so maybe let the other panelists talk about some specific things, but just keep that in mind that everything that we do that combusts something or has a solvent associated with it, even a few drips from a gasoline nozzle, if you have 800,000 people fueling their cars, then each one of those 4 drips turns into tons of air emissions per year. And just the more that we research it, it is just that there's very few single sources that will solve the problem. It's a combination of these incremental improvements from all the sources that will ultimately improve air quality.
And I guess building on what Bryce said, take advantage of the cool programs that Bryce and Erin just talked about with lawn equipment for the amount of work that's done. Lawn equipment is pretty polluting. So look at that. And then there are a lot of organizations out there like UCare and Breathe, and they've got good tips. So take a look at those tips.
You're here today, and there's an age range. I'm guessing, I'm looking at what I think is an age range in the audience. And I know that some of the stuff, I know from being on the Air Quality Board for 9 years especially, this can get pretty thick. And some of the acronyms and the measurements can feel really confusing at the beginning of diving into this realm. But you're here today. Stay with it. Tap into these amazing people. Check out what they're doing on a regular basis. The more you know about the good work and the research that's happening, the more inspired I think we can be as residents to confront the consumption that we do every day and the orders that come to our front doors through trucks and the things that we burn and the things that we eat and how they get here. I get a lot of hope from staying as proximate to this work and this conversation as I can. So I praise you for being here today. There's a lot of great things that the city's doing, and Dr. Mendoza and Kerry Kelly's research around indoor air quality, from the different kind of plants that even help your indoor air quality, to making sure you open that window or turn on a fan when you're using your gas stove. Invest politically in the people who are trying to increase public transit, and support your city wherever you are, or your county, in making those transit investments. And just like our air quality, or just like our water quality or water consumption is reduced more than 34% as we've grown, we can look at air pollution similarly if we make the right kind of investments to switch our highly myopic consumption of resources, like driving our cars all by ourselves, to being more communal in the way that we live and we consume resources. And I hope that you'll support cities and counties who are trying to do that right now.
I want to follow up a little bit about one of the things that Mayor Mendenhall mentioned. How many of you have a gas stove? If you can afford to get rid of it, do. We now know that gas stoves put out actually a stream of toxic compounds, including methane and benzene, even when they're not on. When you turn on your gas stove, it's essentially turning on a diesel truck's engine inside your kitchen. And I have a gas stove. If you can't afford an option like that, then make sure that you vent it. And if you can't vent it, if it's a time of year when you can open the window, please do so. But there is so much toxicity now associated with the gas stoves that if you can possibly afford it, you really should try and do that. Second is, how many of you have an air purifier in your bedroom? Good. A surprising number of people. Some new studies suggest that, in fact, if you have an air purifier in your bedroom, regardless of what the background air pollution levels are, you actually have better cognition the next morning. It's actually an acute benefit to mentation. Now, it has all kinds of other long-term health benefits, but if you can afford an air purifier, which, usually somewhere around $250 to $350, and you really can't afford anything more for your entire house, put it in your bedroom. If theoretically you're going to get 8 hours worth of decent air quality, which will improve just about every critical organ function that you have. Now, there are a couple other things I think worth mentioning. Lately, in trying to fight off some of my own medical problems that I think may have a relationship to air pollution, I've been doing a lot of walking next door to our local high school. The majority of the school buses that I have passed, dropping kids on and off from athletic activities, are idling their buses. The whole time, those buses are waiting for the students. I confronted one of these bus drivers a couple of weeks ago, and I said, do you realize that you're putting this diesel pollution into the entire community, but the person who's being harmed the most is you? Because now we know that there's probably on average, in old buses, 4 to 5 times more pollution in the cabin than outside the cabin. He looked at me like, what? Now, the other part of that is that when all these students come back from their athletic endeavors, whatever the sport is, and they get in that bus that has been idling for hours, they are exposed to a sudden onslaught of diesel pollution. We need a Wasatch front-wide policy that we don't allow school bus idling at all, period, the end. When I asked the bus driver why he was idling, he said, well, I was cold. I said, well, put on another jacket or whatever it takes. There are things like that we can be doing that are easy to do, don't cost people a lot of money, that can improve public health, especially for our children who are the ones that are the most vulnerable.
Thank you, everyone. That's really helpful to know that since we're in this together, there are things that we can do. Bryce, I have a question for you here, actually from our keynote speaker who will be speaking next. She's wondering, you spoke about the change in administration. She's wondering, is it possible that the Trump administration could help advance expansion and transmission expansion and ease the way for more prescribed burning?
So yes, that is one of the components there. Actually, many people aren't aware, we do have an extensive smoke management program in the state of Utah. And as was shared by a previous presenter. So we're one of the states that does require an air quality analysis before any prescribed fire is started. As part of that prescription, we do both a mixing analysis to make sure that the air quality will mix as quickly as possible, and then even on the smallest fires, making sure that there's not a downwind or downslope community, and if there is, make sure that the burning is done in very segmented portions, so that the burning occurs when the mixing is good. Typically at night, we get those downslope winds, so we try to make sure that all the embers are out before it could impact the community. So yeah, it is a big program in Utah. Our federal and state land managers are active participants in that, but there is a request and I think an acknowledgement from that previous panel that that more will likely be done than less, and we'll keep those programs in place that try to minimize those impacts where we can't eliminate them altogether.
Okay, thank you. We have another question, and Kerry, if you can try to answer this. We have a question about how can we apply the state's motto of industry to improving air quality in Utah?
Okay, so I guess I'll mention a couple things. One is a big emitter is leaks. So like methane, oil and gas. So that's product that's not being produced. So and that is very inefficient. So that's one way that you can align industry and being industrious and efficient with improving air quality. In addition, efficiency. It's not very sexy, but there are a lot of savings still to be had there. So I think those are just general energy efficiency, building efficiency, and then monitoring air quality indoors. So it turns out that you might have been in a meeting and it's like you can't stay awake and like what is going on? Like these people are so boring. Well, they might not be that boring. The CO2 levels might be too high. So if CO2 levels get high, it gets kind of stuffy and you feel bored. Well, it's not great for students and it's not great for academic performance. It's not great for your worker performance. Elevated levels of particulate matter indoors, not good for worker performance. So these things are where industry and efficiency all align, and I think there are some big opportunities here.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is for Mayor Mendenhall. Are there examples, we heard some in the earlier panel about local and state initiatives in cities and states outside of Utah, and do you know of any of these initiatives that can be replicated here in Utah, in Salt Lake City? Maybe you already have adopted some. And then we have a reader, if we can kind of pair that with an attendee question. We have an attendee who's asking, Mayor Mendenhall, with the great work and advancements done in Salt Lake City, can we see these same processes extended to other parts of the valley?
Yeah, sure. A lot of the things we've done, the e-bike program we saw most recently before that done in Denver, and we tried to learn from their recent rollout of that. It was really popular. We thought we want to make sure that people who don't have the kind of time and resources that may make them more aware and more capable to apply in a timely manner, that we set aside e-bikes in a bigger way and make sure that our lower income families who might be working 2, 3, 4 jobs, that they also have a fair shot at getting some of these. So we're picking up ideas from around the country. We want to see more electric buses in Salt Lake City. I know that the High Valley Transit System in Park City has been able to get a lot more, in a ratio perspective, electric buses than we have down here in the valley. So UTA also wants that, the availability and the manufacturing of those buses is part of the equation, but we're not done investing in UTA, and we want to see that kind of expansion happen. I would also like to see an expansion of the free fare zone. And I've been to cities like Kansas City where they've expanded the footprint of free transit in the downtown area. I'd really like to see that happen in Salt Lake City. And it's a little bit more complicated than it seems. But as the regional center for the economy and workforce, there's a lot of people coming and going. So even to say that it's free for Salt Lakers is not that simple. But we have the Hive Pass for our residents. But I wanted to mention, I think I like what Kerry was just saying in the question about industry. I think it's actually very Utah and very pro-industry to think about emission savings as the mechanism to fit more industry into the state. There are still rules that Bryce and his team are implementing and standards of how much pollution we're allowed to have, and that limits the ability for the DAQ to issue permits for new sources of pollution. So when the state or the federal regulations influence industry here to clean up and get more efficient, that increases our capacity for more industry. So it's a different way to look at it, but I think it's a very Utah approach.
Thank you. Our next question is for Dr. Moench, and actually, Director Bird, if you could follow up when Dr. Moench is finished. So, current Utah guidelines classify orange air quality days as unhealthy for sensitive groups. And we know that children are classified as a sensitive group, not just a child with asthma, but all children are sensitive groups. So also given the fact that they are sensitive groups, their lungs are more susceptible to damage than adults, should recess policies be changed in Utah? Most schools right now require all students to come in on red days, and Mayor Mendenhall, I see you writing something too, so if anybody wants to follow up, please do. But California does have model indoor activities. This does lead to other systemic barriers, such as funding for AIDS, legislative mandates, so it is a thorny question, but love to get your thoughts on orange air days and outdoor recess for children.
This is one of my pet peeves. There's no magic formula as to at what point our air quality should drive kids inside and not allow them to be outside playing around. But a couple things we need to take into account. Because of our altitude, the average child here along the Wasatch Front breathes a little faster than the average child at sea level. So they're exposed to a little bit more. So we should be taking that into account. Every time you exercise, obviously your heart rate goes up, your respiratory rate goes up, and you are inhaling and distributing throughout your body more and more pollution. So allowing a child who is definitely in that subset of people who are most susceptible to air pollution to exercise in a polluted environment is a real problem. Now, there on the other side of the equation, obviously it's more difficult for teachers to keep order in a classroom where the students haven't had a chance to go out and exercise. So there's no magic formula, but anybody who's studied this as extensively as we have would probably say that when the PM 2.5 levels are in the neighborhood of the mid-30s, that's when I think most of the physicians that we have at our meetings would say, I'm not going to go out and exercise myself under those circumstances. That's not a hard and fast rule by any stretch. But now ratchet that down a little bit for children for the reasons that I just mentioned. I would say anytime that we're approaching what is the threshold for a, quote, moderate air quality designation, which is what, 35 micrograms per cubic meter, I don't have kids that age anymore, but if I did, I would say that's when I don't want my child outside exercising, breathing heavily in that kind of air quality. That doesn't answer the question, but maybe gives a little bit of help.
Just quickly, there has been a lot of coordination with the State Health Department and the school flag program, which both uses our forecast. We try to be proactive, so if things are moving in the direction where we're seeing increased levels of particulate matter during the winter especially, that's when that is triggered and they do move those activities indoors. We can support that, though, with some indoor-outdoor air quality studies that we've done that show that there is a great protection factor, especially during our winter inversions, to moving activities indoors, because while typically during the rest of the year, particulate matters concentrations indoors are much higher than outdoors. During those inversion periods, we see a great protection factor by moving the activities indoors, and we've promoted that and communicated that throughout the state.
Okay, we have about 2.5 more minutes. We have so many questions, but just going to ask 2 more questions and hopefully try to fold in some of our attendee community questions into these. A lot of people have talked about light rail, and we heard in our first panel about the Olympics. So we know that light rail expansion there was a lot of funding with the 2002 Olympics for light rail expansion. So as Utah prepares to host the Winter Olympics in 9 years now, in 2034, what air quality initiatives do you think should be prioritized to ensure we don't have to rely on luck and favorable weather patterns? And Mayor Mendenhall, maybe do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I think that our transit investments for the 2002 games are one of the best long-standing daily impact benefits of the legacy of the games. I think that's why Utahns have continued to support a future games coming here at a rate of 80% or more Utahns saying, yes, that was a good thing and we'd like to do it again. And as the fastest growing state in the nation, which Utah is between the 2010 and 2020 census, and we've continued that with the American Survey annually, we know by looking at other cities like Austin, Texas, and many other around the country that are about 20 years ahead of us in growth, if we don't invest in the transit to keep our growth manageable from a livability, affordability, and environmental aspect, we will not have the quality of life that we enjoy today, and it will cost us more as taxpayers in the end. So transit should be at the top of our priority list. I think the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure bill that came through the Biden administration and Congress are the biggest investments in infrastructure that we've seen in America in over 60 years. Certainly the biggest probably ever when you look at the total dollar amount. We're worried to some extent about some of those funds that were appropriated but haven't been distributed yet, not reaching us. And yet our games are just under 9 years away. So we have a little bit of time, but in terms of transit planning, that's not a long time. And Salt Lake City has a transit master plan. We know where we need more rail based on where we're developing more density and where Salt Lakers go. So we're actually in a really healthy place to go after the money and make the pitch to Congress. And UTA is a fantastic partner to us, which also for all of us as Utahns who may not have that perspective, it's actually pretty unique that the city and the transit provider have a great relationship. And when you look across the country, that is not the case all over the place. So I think we're in a good place. We don't have the money there yet. There have been some funding options, and transit should be at the top of our list for long-term investment improvements thanks to the games.
Okay, Dr. Moench, we're out of time, but if you want to answer for 10 seconds, I then would like to hear just a 10-second quick response from each of you regarding the future.
I'm not a big fan of bringing the Olympics here, with one exception. If we can use that as an excuse to protect Parley's Canyon from being destroyed by an enormous gravel pit, then it will have been worth it.
Thank you, everybody. And, we could probably spend 5 more hours on this, but as we conclude, I'd love to hear from each one of you, maybe just 10 seconds each. What gives you the most hope about Utah's air quality future?
So I think I'll focus on my staff. Several of them are here today, but we have great people and great minds within state government, within our university partners that are studying these issues. I think that we will continue to find good solutions to our air quality problems. I don't think it was only the good part. We're not moving as fast as any of us would like, but again, we're still in the middle. We're not done yet, and I think there's hope for the continued progress that we've made.
And I guess I'll say an opportunity and a challenge is the inland port. So one challenge is a lot of other ports have very stringent plans for what type of equipment they allow in the ports. If we do not have such a plan, we end up with the old crappy equipment that's high emitting. And once you get that equipment here, it's very hard to get it out. So it's an opportunity to make good decisions now.
Kerry, I don't know if that was hopeful, but it is inspiring. And I was going to say, I guess what gives me hope, I'll translate that to inspiration, is how proximate the consequences are to us where we live. These mountains, that lake, that exposed shoreline, the bowl-shaped valley we live in, the visibility of the pollution that we produce and then end up breathing, the sickness that prevails in too many of our neighbors and our family members. We know what the consequences are, and it's been highly motivating for, I think, all of us coming to this conversation today and wanting to be a part of this work. So I'm hopeful because I love this place, and I think you love it too, or you wouldn't care enough to show up and try to make it better. And so I guess us and our proximity to the problem.
I'm hopeful that science is going to save us for a couple of reasons. One, all the technological innovations that I think we're seeing, regardless of the hostile federal government and a hostile state government. If the population remains committed to science, both the medical health consequences of pollution as well as the climate crisis, I think there's a limit to how long our governments can keep the intention and the desire and the opinion and the will of the public at arm's length. The public has to stand up and demand that we accept science in public policy across the board.
All right. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing their expertise. We appreciate it.
Thank you all. We're going to go to a break now. Before we do, just a couple of things. First of all, when you go out into the hall, you'll see up against that north wall a bunch of photos. These are they're photos of art. These are art submissions. They're winners of high school students across the state for a clean air art project or competition that is held in the state every year. Some of them are really inspiring and interesting, and in some cases just moving. Second, thanks to all of you that have hung with us. Thank you to the people who are here in the room particularly. Thank you to the hundreds of people that we have online. Thank you to the 100 students or more that are online. We've been with you too. Lastly, please come back. We have the grand finale. Ann Carlson is up. She's going to be giving our Stegner lecture coming back. So be back here at 3:05. Thanks all.